thinking about your thinking becomes overthinking.
Yeah.
So this is where, and it's really, I would say it's thinking around outcome and performance. I would say it's overthinking around outcome and performance, and I would say it's unhelpful thinking around performance, especially. So if you think of a scale of 1 to 10 with performance, I think the overthinking happens around got to perform, got to be a 9 out of 10, got to be 8 out of 10. Got to stay in the team, and all these things, and it's anxiety around performance that tends to lead to low performance a lot of the time. Ironically, again, I'm going to come back, broken record here. This is where you need your mental playbook. This is where you need to break it down and say, if you're going to demand anything from yourself, if you're going to expect anything from yourself, it's around mindset.
Good luck to my ancestors.
Hope they're well.
Hope they're well.
Great little caviar.
Very good caviar.
Welcome to this episode of the SCULPTED podcast, guys. It is actually one of the first episodes in a long time that we've done virtually, and it's one thing that we are probably doing less and less because we're more in person, but there's a rare exception, and the rare exception is Dan Abrahams. And we can allow that one because he is a returning guest and a very, very, he's admired in our field. And I'd say that if any other sports people and I mean, Dan, you work with MMA people, you work with golfers, you've been all around the sports codes, and it's a very, very admirable, I'd say, code that you've got, and we are very, very keen to pick your brain a little bit, Dan. So, yeah, we're very, very excited to have you on. Maybe, Dan, you could give a quick intro to yourself to any of the new listeners who are listening today.
Sure. Well, thank you very much. I'm delighted and honoured to be here, and especially as you rarely do online stuff, and you do them in person now, although that would be quite tricky given I'm in the UK and you're in Australia. So it will be a hell of a journey for one of us or a few of us. So Dan Abrahams, I'm a sports psychologist. I have about 30 years or just under 30 years experience in high performance sport. Originally a professional golfer, then a golf coach, and for the last 18, 19 years, I've been a registered and qualified sports psychologist here in the UK, but I operate globally. I've worked across all sports, as you've mentioned. I've held senior positions in British sport. I've been lead site for England golf, England rugby, going into the 2019 World Cup. I'm currently a consultant psychologist at Aston Martin Formula One. And really there isn't a sport I haven't done some form of work in, whether that's with coaches or with players or, within the industry in some sense. But the majority of my work has been in football or soccer, if you prefer that term for it. I've worked at about half a dozen Premier League clubs. I've just come out of a 2-year stint with Feyenoord in the Dutch Eredivisie Championship, with the pleasure of working alongside Arne Slot, who's now become a pretty famous guy because he's a head coach of Liverpool now. I have worked with some of the best players in the world, worked with players globally, worked with coaches, soccer coaches globally. I've got 4 books, one of them golf, 3 of them football, soccer, one of which, Soccer Tough, very kindly Gareth Bale said changed his life. As I always say, I don't think it changed his life, but it was very nice of him to say so. And I have my own podcast, actually. It's called The Sports Psych Show, where it's an excellent podcast in as much as I'm a deeply average host, but I have wonderful guests, and we do serious deep dives into the academic side of sports psychology, and try to demystify it for our audience. So I'm pretty busy in that respect. So yeah, that's me.
Amazing, Dan. As I tried to best summarize in my little intro to you, Dan, it is incredible seeing the resume that you've got. It is quite impressive. I think I recall seeing the Feyenoord stint that they had was incredible when you were there. And I also remember seeing you on quite a few big podcasts as well, and interviews with some pretty awesome people. So again, like, just to emphasize, very, very privileged to actually have you on the podcast with us, and really grateful. It's really awesome. So to kind of move on to the real juice of everything, Dan, I'm going to pass the microphone over to Jack. And Jack's got a few questions that he's got for you in the first few minutes.
Thank you, Nick. And obviously, Dan, like you spoke about, you've been across so many codes. I was wondering, are there any common characteristics amongst elite performers that you would say across the board?
Yeah, sure. Absolutely. I mean, I always, in very simplistic, stripped back terms, Jack, I would always say that when I work with sporting competitors who are ambitious to discover just how good they can be, you can really break it down to two M's. And, you know, I am stripping things back here. I suppose I'm looking at things from an individual perspective here, although both M's can be broadened out. But those two M's are mindset and mastery, mindset and mastery. And for me, I think the very greatest competitors, sporting competitors, are the ones who are very heavily invested and have a very sophisticated relationship with mindset and with mastery. Let's tackle mastery first, just briefly. Mastery being mastering your craft. You know, striving every single day to learn, develop, to improve your game. And so there's a whole raft of things with relation to that. But I think this word mastery is something I'm very passionate about. I think it's really interesting. So I try to help sporting competitors to learn more effectively, to develop quicker and more efficaciously. I think mastery is where it's at. And I think it's a key differentiator between competitors. And then that second word, mindset. You know, and we can break this down in some depth if you'd like to today. We can break down both M's if you'd like. But mindset being, I suppose, the ability to engage. I mean, I would also incorporate mastery into this, but the ability to engage in your sport every single day. And really we engage without a loss of enthusiasm. And then also the ability to compete, right? The ability to, and I would define competing, a great competitor is somebody who high performs consistently under pressure. High performs consistently under pressure. So when I think about all the sports that I've worked across, it's always the same. And it doesn't matter if it's soccer or if it's AFL or if it's rugby league or, you know, if it's darts, it's always the same. Mastery and mindset, mastery and mindset, mastery and mindset. From a mindset perspective, it's the capacity to high perform consistently under pressure. So those would be the obvious common characteristics across elite sporting competitors. And those are the factors I'm working on with those competitors.
Okay, that is interesting, because what came to mind for me was it would look so different for different athletes, I think. But I think that also encapsulates it all. It came to mind if I think of a young player in a Premier League team bursting onto the scene, they almost have that raw freedom. And I wouldn't think there is that much, from probably a fan's point of view, that much deep thinking or mindset or even mastery in that. It's just so raw. It's as if you're with your mates at the park. Like, you think of Wayne Rooney when he came onto the scene at Everton and early years of Manchester United. Whereas that's also, if I think about someone like Ilkay Gundogan for Manchester City, he's a very deep thinker. He's quite an intellectual as well. So the kind of like, they're both elite performers, but obviously the way they kind of transitioned their mastery and mindset would be different.
Yeah, sure. So I think what you're referring to there, Jack, and it's a really good point that enables us to broaden out this conversation. You're talking about individual differences. There is an overwhelm of individual differences in terms of how people master their craft or look to master their craft, and ultimately how mindset can play out. And those individual differences both help and hinder. I mean, you used an example there of Wayne Rooney, and undoubtedly, certainly if you're my age, and I'm a few years older than Wayne Rooney, I remember him coming onto the scene at Everton Football Club to begin with, and then obviously getting his move to Manchester United. He was just incredible. I mean, he almost single-handedly won the Euros for England. Was it back in 2002, 2004, excuse me. I mean, just an incredible young player who, as you would say, to strip it back in very basic terms, probably wouldn't think too much about the game and would just do. And that certainly helped him at the time. I do think it's an interesting case study. As things evolved and he got older and different challenges came into his life and different challenges in the game emerged, I wonder if towards the mid and towards the end of his career, that he needed to think a little bit more. He needed a little bit more discipline, whether it was positional or just in terms of mastery, just a little bit more thinking going into his game. Whereas somebody like Gundogan there, as you said, I mean, I don't know much about Ilkay Gundogan. It sounds like you know a little bit more than me. But if he is, as you describe, an intellectual, if he's a real thinker about the game, again, think about this from a helping and hindering perspective. That can absolutely help him. It might enable him to take more time to analyze his game. And game analysis, you could argue, is crucial. But there's no question about it. Somebody like that might start to overthink things, right? But then I've worked with players who aren't particular thinkers about the game, yet at the same time they might overthink the game because they're overthinking: am I in the team? Am I out the team? What's the gaffer thinking? What's the coach thinking? What do I have to do to stay in the team? It'll be a disaster if this happens, and so. There's an interesting juxtaposition between overthinking, okay, and being a thinker. And so I would always say, if I was to hone in on one aspect here of what you're saying, yes, there's going to be an enormous amount of individual differences between people under this umbrella term of mindset and perhaps mastery as well. But I do want young players, as best as they possibly can, to engage in some thinking about their game. Now, the particularly fancy term we have in psychology is self-regulated learning, right? And think about that term, self-regulated, to self-regulate learning. You're learning to self-regulate your learning, to be a great learner, to be passionate about learning. How do I learn? How do I best learn? How do I best learn this game? Okay. How do I go into training and improve? Because what we know is that if I go into training and I just train, and I train with intensity, say, that's not a bad thing, that's a good thing. But what we know about learning is I really need to be able to direct my attention onto the things that I want to improve. I need to be able to reflect as I'm training, as I'm engaging in practice. I need to be able to tweak things as I'm engaging in practice. And I need to engage in feedback from my coaches to get that outside viewpoint. And then I probably need to be able to reflect deeply on what I've just experienced within training. All of that comes under the umbrella term of self-regulated learning. And the world's leading expert in expertise, who sadly passed away a few years ago now, is a guy called Dr. Anders Ericsson. And he talked about deliberate practice, right? So that was his version of self-regulated learning, deliberate practice, to deliberately practice, to practice intentionally. And I think that is something that young players, I really believe, have to engage in order to discover just how good they can be. Now, again, let's come back to this crucial distinction. That isn't overthinking. That is emphasizing effective and efficient and efficacious thinking about your game in order to engage in mastery. And you could say that's also having a great mindset as well. So a range of individual differences here, but I think there are some commonalities amongst great competitors and masters of their sport. So I would always orient young players and older players alike towards mastery, deliberate practice, self-regulated learning, those kind of things. And we've obviously just honed in on a comment you made about Wayne Rooney and Gundogan there. There's a whole raft of things we can talk about with relation to individual differences.
Yeah, and I think what you said with self-regulated learning, it's almost an awareness of what works for you and the individual differences. By engaging in self-regulated learning, you learn whether you're a player that needs to, like you said, maybe think more deeply about the game and your role in it, or you're a player that needs to think of basic cues of, I'm going to be out wide and I'm going to go off instinct, for example. And I think, like you said, it is stripping it back and almost by investing in your mindset and your mastery and trying to learn about the game and like deliberate practice, that's the only way you're going to be able to really get the best out of yourself.
And I love what you said then, Jack. I would also provide a gentle check and challenge to what you've said, in as much as I do agree. Self-awareness is really important here. Awareness of how you feel that you do things best. How you, as I mentioned, that how do I best learn? So I'm almost giving a gentle check and challenge on myself here, listening to what you're saying, because I'm also thinking about that teasing element of thinking about, might there be a better way to do this? And also over the course of a career, things change, as I said. Things changed for Wayne Rooney, for example. And so as somebody matures and maybe you have different challenges, maybe you take on a different role, maybe suddenly you're a leader or you're trying to emphasize teamwork. Trent Alexander-Arnold recently came out and said, I now take my leadership role at Liverpool very seriously. And then you think about somebody like Trent and you think about the change from Jurgen Klopp to Arne Slot and maybe different positional discipline. And so careers change. And so, yes, you are right. And also emphasizing what I said, I've got to learn how I best learn, how I best approach the game. But I've also got to keep as open a mind as to other ways of doing and being, other ways of thinking, other ways of approaching things. Now, again, I don't want to overthink that. This is the sweet spot here. I don't want to overthink that to ruin my game, but at the same time, to damage my game. But at the same time, I can't keep the blinkers on. So it's a very challenging sweet spot to find. And I don't think players should be overly worried about that, but people like me have to keep an eye on that for players, especially for my clients, if that makes sense, Jack.
And for Nick and I, when we were in the professional football setup and chasing our dreams, we're very introspective people in that sense. And obviously we hadn't had the professional guidance from a sports psychology route. So I think I can probably speak for both of us, is we probably looked at someone like Cristiano Ronaldo or like these mentality monsters in inverted commas and thought, what does he do? It obviously works for him. I should do it too. And I think what you said there is, I know for a fact in my career, I did get caught into that overthinking part, is that I almost thought so much and worked so much on the mental side that it was like I was forcing myself to no, Jack, you need to think like this, as opposed to having that clear message. And I have looked at what you've said a lot about the high performance mindset and almost key cues about always bring yourself back to that high performance mindset, regardless of the state of the game. I'm going to be in my high performance mindset. And I think that is really valuable because it almost strips away all the variables from individual differences.
Oh, absolutely, Jack. I mean, this leans into my next book, which we're sitting here at the beginning of November. I'm hoping end of the year, early next year, this book will be out, where I'm inviting players of all sports, but team sports, to create mental playbooks. I think every player needs a mental playbook. And again, emphasizing this notion of we don't want to overthink, we don't want to underthink, but we have to find that sweet spot. I think that's what a mental playbook helps somebody, an ambitious competitor to do. You've mentioned this term, high performance mindset, or for short HPM, high performance mindset. I want every player to know what helps them find their high performance mindset and what helps them avoid a low performance mindset, an LPM, and what helps them shift from LPM to HPM. And that can be as simple as one thing, or as it could be slightly broader as a couple of techniques or performance philosophies. It doesn't matter. But when you've got these terms in place, when you have this framework or structure, if we want to call it that, that enables us to be able to flex away from what we don't want onto what we want. And it also helps us to create an inner story and inner narrative every single day about what we want, which then invites in high performance on game day. So I think, if I was to summarize what I do, I help competitors and coaches, but competitors to make sense of their world from an engagement, learning, and competing perspective. I talk about 3 Ps: participation, progression, performance. Participation, progression, performance. The participation piece being the engagement piece, which is kind of, it encompasses the day-to-day well-being, mental health, trying to feel as good as one can be going into training and game day every single day. And then, as I said, the progression piece is the mastery. It's the learning, the developing, the improving. And then the performance is the competing, the consistent high performance under pressure. So if we can have mental playbooks around these areas, we invite in good habits, we invite in consistency. And so subsequently, we give ourselves a better chance to enjoy what we're doing, improve, and compete.
Okay, that is very interesting, because I think, like, obviously you went into so much depth there, and the HPM is obviously a almost simple version for the athlete to remember in the heights of battle in their game. Almost
Very much.
all that complex thinking that they probably have done, it really strips it back to a few things that they really are the essence of their performance. And I think another question I wanted to ask was, in terms of that, and like the power of, as you probably know, like negative self-schemas and your narrative that can form at a young age. In terms of, I coach young footballers as well, and if I think back to my career, sort of the self-narratives that I think about my game, they were built when I was really young, and just subconsciously as well. So I think, what would you say is the importance of coaching at a young age, and how players at a young age should develop?
Before I answer the question, I'm going to do the classic psychologist trick of asking you a question back to your question. Okay. You talk about this, you use the term schema. Okay. So, and you're defining that as a narrative around your experiences, I suppose, or correct me if I'm wrong, but what kind of schemas or what kind of narrative did you have around your football as a consequence of, your experiences at a young age?
Probably my strongest schema would be, I had to be a hard worker, because at a young age, I didn't make a lot of football teams. Yeah. And I was never one of those players that no coach ever said, oh, he's technically brilliant, but it was always, his attitude is so professional. So even when I had maybe built up the skills where I was at a professional technical level, I always, if my confidence was down, that was the first thing to go, because I would look for evidence that would fall into that negative self-schema that, Jack, you've never been technically at the level. You've always had to work hard. And that's probably something that I tried to challenge, but once it's so powerful, obviously, that once it's built, even if you try forget about it, it's very hard to challenge.
Yeah. I think it's really interesting because as you're speaking, it's making me think of the work of a wonderful American psychologist who's actually, he's not a sports psychologist, but he is very much a personality scientist. Dr. Colin DeYoung. I think he's based in Massachusetts, and he's done some incredible work within this sphere of personality science. And he, within his work, he talks a lot about the things that influence our traits, our personality traits. And he breaks these things down to 3 things, to three characteristics that influence our traits: goals, interpretations, and strategies. Goals, interpretations, and strategies. And other personality scientists might talk, might broaden that to beliefs, for example. I mean, listening to you, I feel I'm hearing some beliefs there. Schemas, as you've said. There's a whole raft of things that scientists might break this down to, but I like this idea of three things: goals, the goals I set myself, the interpretation I have about my world and the world around me, and the strategies I use as I interpret things and as I try to reach for my goals. And so listening to you there, and again, you could exchange the word interpretation for beliefs. You know, this interpretation of I have to work hard, this interpretation of I'm not a technical player. These interpretations can both, again, I'm going to use that notion of helping and hindering. You know, there's nothing wrong with an interpretation of I have to work hard in my football to be good. Okay, you could say that's a very healthy interpretation, but look at where the limit might lie. I write about this all the time in terms of these memes on social media that talk about the grind. You got to grind, you got to grind, you got to grind, which, well, is that right? Is that wrong? Well, there's no doubts that if you want to be good at something, at anything in life, any discipline, in any domain, that you probably have to do something quite a lot to be good. There's very few people, if anybody on planet Earth, who gets to the very top without doing it a lot, right? So no, there's no doubts about that. However, we need to do it for a long time to get good, right? And we need to have a lot of energy for a long time to get good. So then we go, okay, well, then hard work and the grind, well, maybe we need to look at this in a slightly more nuanced manner. Maybe we need to look at this from the perspective of, well, I need to do this a lot, but I also need to enjoy doing this. I have to enjoy engaging in my sport for a long time. So if at a very young age, and if you're a coach of young players, I don't know, and I'll go in at 7, 8, 9-year-old, 10-year-old level. It's okay for 7, 8, 9, 10-year-olds to take their sport seriously, but we also need to manage the messages that we've got because it's going to shape their interpretations. So if we say, you've got to take this really, really seriously, you've got to look at what the professionals do. Look at Kobe Bryant, the late, great Kobe Bryant, who used to get up at 4 a.m. and grind. Well, you're using the term schema. I'm using the term interpretate. The interpretations that you're building in these young people's. Now, you could say, well, you know, you're helping them interpret the situation as they've got to work hard, and that's a healthy thing. But also, you can lead to burnout and overtraining, leading to injury, quick loss of enjoyment because, hey, it's so serious, the adultification of sport, right? So if we bring the coaches in, which you've invited me to do, I would say it's asking coaches to look at the nuance here, look at the complexity, manage the messages that you're delivering to young players. And that makes coaching very difficult, okay? Because again, I'm saying there's nuance here. There's nothing wrong with saying to a young person, well, you probably got to work hard and do things a lot to get good at them. I think that can be a very useful message and a healthy message to a point. But look at how it shaped you, and maybe how at times you worked too hard or you were too intense. I know in my golf career, my early golf was shaped by a legendary British golfer called Sir Nick Faldo. And my interpretation constantly of Sir Nick's grind, beat balls, bleeding hands, beat balls. And I got worse as a golfer, I believe, as a consequence of that. Mates would say a lack of talent made me worse, but for me, which is probably somewhat true, but
you and me both. Yeah,
it was just a misunderstanding, and that played on my well-being. It played on my enjoyment. I was overly serious. I was too intense. I was tight. I was rigid. I had no freedom, and that influenced my ability. I would never have got in the world's top 200 or 500. I just wasn't good enough. But I certainly would have won more money, and I certainly would have had more fun had I relaxed a little bit. And also, let's come back to this idea that we spoke about as being deliberate practice. If you're immersed in this world of grind, the reality is you're probably not going to look at the nuance and technicalities of how to practice effectively. So let's come back to what you were saying. The interpretations, the beliefs, the schemas that young people have about their sport is important. And there is a complexity here in as much as the message of hard work isn't a bad one, but one has to temper those messages. So you, I think, in amongst that, asked me to talk about, coaches, what should their message be to young players? Well, I do think first and foremost, as much as a coach of under 10s might see themselves as Jose Mourinho or Emma Hayes, if they're on the women's side of things, they've got to remember there's 10-year-olds in front of them. That, again, 10-year-olds are allowed to take their game seriously. But temper your message. You are not Jose Mourinho working at Fenerbahce, right? Or Chelsea or Rome.
For parents and coaches.
Yeah,
as well.
Parents and coaches. So enjoyment, first of all, right? Your session design, your coach behaviors need to be enveloped in this notion of young people. We get participation, the engagement piece. I want this young person to enjoy football. I want them to engage in this sport in a manner that's going to promote lifelong enjoyment and engagement in the sport. And then we might think of health, movement, activity, playing sport for those objectives. And then we might think of psychosocial objectives, teamwork, leadership, communication, values, psychosocial objectives. And then we might think of skill development. And then we might think of competing in games and stuff. So there's a kind of a hierarchy of needs, if you like, that are slightly removed from this classic lens of sport in terms of got to work hard, got to be good, got to be good. Now, again, I want to emphasize, final thing here, that doesn't mean that a 10-year-old, an 8-year-old, a 12-year-old can't take their sport seriously. There's nothing wrong with that, and one shouldn't belittle that. But at the same time, it's important to envelope a young player in the kind of environment that is hitting participation, engagement, and progression, learning first before any kind of performance factors get involved.
And that is, they feed into each other as well by prioritizing participation and the psychosocial aspect of it. They're more likely to hone their skills and think about mastery and mindset at an older age if it is still inherently something that they associate with it being fun. And I think there has been like you said, there's such a culture now about Premier League academies signing players at 5 years old or 4 years old. It's crazy. And there is almost that lack of nuance. To bring it back to my sort of belief is there was no nuance about, you're right, my hard work, it is good to work hard, but it does limit you as well. And to give some context as well, it limited me so much. Now I've got no meniscus in my knee and the start of arthritis at 23. So it did work. It almost, being able to be like mindful of the limits to it and the nuance, I think it does start from a young age, and it's a huge thing.
It's so well said, Jack, and I'm going to come back to something you said earlier, but it as you were speaking, it was making me think of the importance of creating a safe and healthy environment within your coaching practice. And those two words are important, safe and healthy. Safe being, as I say, the promotion of participation from an enjoyment perspective. But then the balancing healthy. I mean, there's nothing wrong with a competitive environment from a certain age. That's healthy for some people, for some young people who want to engage in their game that way. So safe and healthy. But I think reflecting on one thing you said there that I think is really important, which a lot of people miss, is that sophisticated relationship with talent development pathways and the participation in sport from a young age, the connections made. You made an interesting connection there between initial enjoyment, health, sport for health purposes, physical health, mental health, activity, psychosocial development, skill acquisition, and then competing. If there's a linear pathway, and I don't think these things work linearly, they work in parallel, but if there's a linear pathway, it's like that. It's connecting up that if we want great competitors at 16, 17, 18, or that's when, serious competition might start, possibly, probably for those who want that, then you'd probably be able to connect up the experiences they have at 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 years old. If they're enjoying it, then they've probably got more chance of engaging in their sport at 16. If they are doing things for health purposes at that young age, then they've probably got more chance of getting to the competitive level at 16. If they're building their psychosocial skills from 7, 8, 9, 10 within the activity of their sport, then they're probably going to be better competitors at 16. If they've got a light introduction to mental skills at that very young age, they're probably going to be both better self-regulators and self-managers at 16, so better competitors. So this notion of competing starts at 16 is nonsense. Competing, you could say, starts at 6. It just starts with enjoyment and health and basic mental skills and psychosocial skills and skill acquisition, not the kind of intense experience that you document that you potentially had at a young age.
Yeah, it's the process over the outcome in that sense.
Yeah, of course.
Sort of focus. But I think Nick and I would probably both reflect on. And I think if you ask most professional footballers who finished their career, if they were asked what their highlights were or what they gained most, it would be those mental skills. It wouldn't be the football, what they learned how to dribble a ball or how to pass a ball or the win they had at 15 years old. It would be the things that they value most are those resilience skills, those work ethic skills, the people they've met along the way. The fact Nick and I can do this podcast together because of football, it's so valuable. So I think it is important for a lot of former players do get into coaching, almost having that awareness that that is the main thing for those 8, 10-year-olds to build up, as opposed to let's make them the next Wayne Rooney.
Absolutely. I do think if you're a coach of 8, 9, 10 years old, probably incumbent within your role is understanding that the lens here is not, I'm going to create the next Wayne Rooney. It's more the participation stage. Again, it doesn't mean there can't be, there's still going to be skill acquisition in there. That doesn't mean there can't be an introduction to mental skills that link with competitive skills. I'm not suggesting that. But ultimately, the lens of the world here for coaches at that age group, I would argue, would be engagement, and I spoke to one parent from the US the other day, and he said his 9-year-old child, that the coach of his 9-year-old child turned around to him and said, "My job is to break your son." So to break him and then build him back up, which is just, it's not Pep Guardiola's job to break anybody, just let alone a 9-year-old child. It's such a pervasive view of sporting participation. It's just bizarre, but these are stuck socio-cultural messages that we need to slowly filter out of sport, I believe. And again, I'm heavily invested in the competitive level every single day. And, I'm somebody who is thinking 24/7 about how do I help my clients be better competitors on the world stage. So, if anybody says to me, "Wow, Dan, you're being, that classic, you're being soft," and etc., I'm absolutely not. Never have been. I've dedicated my life to working out how do I help people become better competitors, to win gold medals, to win world championships, to win Premier Leagues, to win World Cups across all sports, to win major championships. That's what I do every day. But what I know is part of the pathway here is understanding the best possible source of participation for young people. And it's, as you say, the lens of the world that you want to have when you deal with very young people or children is exactly what you said: enjoyment, health, psychosocial, behavioral skills, pockets of skill acquisition before competitive skills.
From what you just said, it came to mind fear in both coaches and players at the elite level. I think the irony was you said that people would look at some things you say and say, oh, it's soft. But I think it's quite the opposite. I think it's almost combating the fear that is so inherent in so many coaches. And it's why coaches come into a football club and play long ball, because of that fear of protecting their job. And players do the same thing. What would you say, what have you found from fear in the people you've worked with across football and other codes of sport?
Well, I think in very simple, stripped back terms, I can think of two C's here that are the solutions, and that's competence and confidence, and they go hand in hand. If a coach is fearful, then they've got to build their competence. They've got to learn about coaching, their craft. They've got to learn about sports science. They've got to learn about sports psychology. They've got to learn about human behavior. You know, ultimately, if that's going to be your life passion and your job, but from a coach's perspective, you refuse to look at the complexity of human beings and you refuse to look at the complication of elite level sport, then you're going to have minimal competence, and that's going to reflect in your coaching practice. That's going to reflect in your tactics. That's going to reflect in how you deal with the human beings in front of you. And so subsequently, I would always say fear, that you turn down the volume of fear, not completely, because you never do. And fear can be useful. Of course, it's a driver, but you manage your experience of fear by developing your competence. And to be competent, you have to be open-minded. That doesn't mean you have to be an open vessel that accepts everything. I mean, if I turn my attention here to Arne Slot, for example, and I want to be respectful of what I say here, but one thing I would always say about Arne is that he was both open-minded and closed-minded. He had that neat balance. When I was introduced to him for the first time and I delivered a presentation to him and his coaching staff, okay, he would have sat there fearful because I was being introduced from the perspective of we want Dan to work with our team, our players. And so this is his livelihood. Of course he's going to be scared. Of course he's going to have a fear. So what does he do? He asks me tough questions. He checks and challenges me, which he absolutely did do. And I don't think we agreed upon everything. And that's absolutely fine. But I would suggest he hit that sweet spot between being, okay, I'm going to be open to what you've got to say, but I'm also not going to accept absolutely everything that you say and bring everything into my coaching practice that you say.
It's that confidence in his competence, right?
He's got confidence in his competence, and his competence also drives his confidence. You know, I would say fear is, you know, like any psychologist would say, you know, fear is there. It's a good thing. We have to have fear. We have to have a brain that attunes to both threats and rewards. So threats are there, and we're going to have a response, and we've got to choose what we do with that response. And I think coaches have to be able to go, okay, well, I have to develop myself. I'm going to experience fear, but I've got to build my competence high enough to be able to sit with the fear and engage as a coach anyway. You know, I sit with the fear, but I engage anyway. I build my competence. I sit with the fear. I engage. I deliver. I reflect. I tweak. In essence, I develop in action based on the actions that I execute. And so this is imperative. So I think it comes back to competence and confidence. And we really function in an age now in high performance sport where no longer can you get away with perhaps what historically coaches have gotten away with. That's not to suggest that old school mentalities can't help here and there, and it's not to suggest overthinking doesn't exist. Of course, too complex and too complicated environment can damage performance and learning as much as, you know, a well thought out environment, or an overly thought out environment and culture. But coaches do have to develop themselves. They really, really do.
And I think the overall sort of message is that you can't fix and maybe going back to the old school approach, you can't fix a mental sort of problem, which fear would be, with a physical solution. It's not, let's do another 20 runs of the pitch, or let's not do another 50 shots, because if you're trying to fix that, it's almost not addressing the root cause of the problem.
Well, yes, and no. I think that today, dwelling on this notion of taking a sophisticated lens of performance in sport, of engagement in sport, again, that participation piece and learning in sport, I do think we have to take a holistic viewpoint, and we have to look at intervening from a systemic perspective. So across a club, across a team, across an organization, every word, every behavior, every department counts. And so from that perspective, I would say the gym is also the psychologist's couch, and the psychologist's couch is also the gym. I would say the training ground is the psychologist's couch, and the psychologist's couch is the training ground. Technique is mindset, and mindset is technique. Tactics are mindset, and mindset is tactics. Physicality is mindset, and mindset is physicality. So I'm being a bit cheeky in my response here, so please excuse me, because you made a point, and it's a point to make, and it's a good point to make, and I'm not saying it's a wrong point. I just think it's a slightly more nuanced and subtle thing, in as much as solutions lie broadly and deeply systemically, rather than singularly, or from a reductionist perspective. We have to look at things systemically and holistically, rather than singularly and reductionist, if that makes sense.
That does make sense, and it sort of reminds me of sort of Ange Postecoglou's kind of a lot of what he speaks about. Obviously, we're Australian, so we have a particular focus on him.
Big up to Ange Postecoglou, friend of the pod.
Yeah.
If I may interject, I'm a fan. I have to say, I've been very impressed, and again, I want to come across as respectful as possible here. I think as a sports psychologist, one of the things that frustrates me, and I mean this with the greatest respect, because I'm talking about people who've forgotten more about their sport than I'll ever know, and I always respect that. But I think there's a lot of BS out there when it comes to the psychological content and delivery from some head coaches, managers, if you want to call them that. There's a lot of funky pseudo-scientific stuff that's delivered that really either doesn't make, sometimes works, no doubt about it, but either doesn't make much sense, or it just isn't repeatable. They're not repeatable messages. But Ange, I've been posting recently, there's always some good content coming out here. I mean, I posted one yesterday where he's in conversation with Rio Ferdinand, and he's talking. I happened to post the blooming wrong video, actually. It didn't go with the piece that I wrote, so I was tearing my hair out last night. But there was a wonderful video here with him talking with Rio Ferdinand, and they've highlighted a game and the behaviors of the players. And Ange is talking about, the passiveness of the players. And he's talking about how they're responding to the time in the game and the score, rather than, just engaging in the game plan and playing on, he would say, perhaps the front foot. They're engaging with the time, and their behaviors and their actions are influenced by the time and the score, rather
not their high performance mindset.
Rather than a high performance mindset, precisely the game plan wrapped in a high performance mindset. And again, I think, so I love the messages that Andrew, I'd like to, I feel I could help him from the perspective of really deepening the sophistication there from a high performance mindset perspective. And I think we did that really well at Feyenoord. Again, we really got into the definitions of a high performance mindset and help as many individuals as possible to have their own mental playbook around this high performance mindset. I think that's vital these days. So big fan of Ange.
As are we. I'll pass back on to Nick. I think he's got maybe a final question to wrap up. Thank you, Dan. I do appreciate your insight. It is truly unbelievable.
Yes. So firstly, guys, there was so much in there that I was writing down all my little like points, and then I'm thinking, okay, we're gonna go over time for sure. So I wanted to actually kind of summarize a few of my main points that I thought of throughout your conversation, Ben. And I've got 7 questions, but I want these to be as like almost open as possible to try and just get like a blanket kind of like assumption almost. Does that make sense?
Okay. Yep.
Okay. All right. They're almost quick fire. So my first one is, and Jack will laugh at quite a lot of these because he probably anticipated these questions. Does passion actually help, and can it be faked or replicated?
Passion helps and hinders, just like any other character trait. Passion helps and hinders. Passion can absolutely motivate, but at the same time, passion can demotivate because it can burn you out. What was the second part of that question?
Can it be faked or replicated?
Can it be faked or? I believe let's get rid of the word faked. I think it can be. I think human beings have the capacity to use psychological mechanisms to step into a world that they need at any given time that helps them to better high perform in that moment. And I think those mechanisms help somebody to be a combination of authentic and inauthentic. There's a lot of work, obviously, a lot of messages around the importance of being authentic, and I wouldn't deny that. At the same time, as human beings, we come with challenges and flaws and areas that we're good at and areas that not so good at. And so there's times, and this leans into my technique of game face. I think that sports people need to have an idea of what they want their game face to be, which is a mix of authentic and inauthentic, in their performance moments. And that's in sport, that's in the workplace, that's in your social life, that's in your home life. I think sometimes you've got to be able to self-regulate quickly. And that's how I would answer this. So passion can be a part of that. If there's something you're not particularly passionate about, but the environment demands for a passion, it's not so much that you can fake it. It's just you might need to use psychological mechanisms to adapt your behavior to what is required in that moment.
That was a very good point. My next question, and Jack, I could see Jack holding a few laughs, and he's gonna have to hold a few other laughs now. But I'll ask that next one. Okay, so we mentioned confidence and competence, so the 2 C's. What comes first, confidence or competence?
The old chicken and the egg. How deep do you want to go here? I would say confidence is in part. So confidence is both global and situated. By global, I mean confidence is arguably part of the character trait of conscientiousness, which allegedly has a hereditary link, a genetic link, but is seen from sort of behaviors around conscientiousness are seen from 2 years old. And part of conscientiousness is confidence. So you could argue that it has a genetic link, confidence, but also confidence is situated, and that we use the term self-efficacy for that. And so situated confidence is, influenced by both your hereditary confidence and your learning, your competence. So I would say it's a complicated mixture of both. It depends on what domain or discipline you're talking about within your own life. And so depending on what it is, there can be a keen mix of your own personal confidence from your character trait of conscientiousness combined with the competence built from your experiences, your coaching, etc., etc. So my very complicated answer is it is both.
Yeah.
And it depends.
I would kind of see it like as a bar chart where the confidence and competence are kind of fighting for each other. And there'd be probably a few moments where the confidence is above the competence, but then you kind of are searching for that proof and that confirmation bias that your confidence is true, which then makes your competence probably go up a little bit. And they kind of just push each other up. And yeah, it's a weird little mix.
Yeah,
Do you want to finish on?
it's a lovely interpretation, which helps you make sense of it. Whether that's accurate or not depends on who's listening in and what they think about what you've just said.
That's a great point, Dan. That is a great point. Okay. So the next question that I've got is and this one's gonna make Jack, laugh. Is burnout laziness / a lack of awareness when there are no external things in play? Now, I mean this in the context of, like, when I think about myself, I never ever felt burnt out. I would say that I felt like feelings at times of being burnt out, but I never ever labeled it as burnt out. And there was never a moment where I'm like, you know what, I'm going to stop training 3 times a day because I'm burnt out. And I didn't let that state control me. So do you think it is a maybe sign of laziness or a lack of awareness on how to counteract these emotions?
It could be a lack of awareness of how to train effectively, how hard to work, if you want to describe it that way. But again, awareness is linked to the character trait of openness to experience, openness to your inner experiences. Some people are blissfully aware of certain characteristics that they hold. So it's absolutely, in my opinion, not laziness, but it can absolutely be linked to a lack of awareness. But lack of awareness isn't necessarily somebody's fault. It could be part of their makeup. Now, then you're asking, well, can that be upskilled? For very many people, it can be upskilled enormously so. And probably for some people, it can be upskilled a little bit. The question is, there might be some people out there who might really struggle to be aware of their inner world with relation to their outer world. And so subsequently, they are the kind of people who can fall into the trap of burnout. They're burnt out before they realize. And that's the end of that. As you said, external influences are the biggest source of burnout, because cheers, parents, etc., etc. But if you are a high conscientious individual, and part of that, let's go back to this trait of conscientiousness. It's industriousness. It's ambition. It's want. This is a part of conscientiousness, and so you're engaging in your discipline, your craft every single day. Again, that's a part of who you are. And so, it could be nobody from the outside making you do what you do. It could just be you. And then suddenly this burnout creeps up on you. So absolutely. And that can make a difference to your well-being, your mental health. So again, I don't think you can lay blame for anybody. It's just, can you have that keen combination of conscientiousness from an ambition perspective, but also that sense of awareness to be able to temper that ambition when you need to?
From the people who are highly conscientious or ambitious, it brings me back to what you said about participation and almost recognizing why they participate in the first place. I think obviously with ambition, you can get very caught up in probably the other 2 P's about your performance and etc. But almost remembering your participation piece and what it actually brings you, like separate from kind of the outcome related.
Enormously so. And this is where working with young players can be really, really challenging for people like myself. Because, for example, you've got a young player who's ambitious for themselves. I mean, let's take a young 12-year-old who has a child's brain. And so their capacity to self-regulate is often not as good as an adult, almost always not as good as an adult. And that's not to suggest every adult is great at self-regulating. Most people aren't. So you've got this 12-year-old who really wants to be. They're watching Premier League football, global football every single day. They want to be great, and they'll work hard. They do everything that they need to, probably like yourself did, Jack. And so you start to feel tired. You start to feel fatigued, and you have a lot of anxiety and stress about being in the team and so on and so forth. And so, suddenly somebody like myself comes along because I've been engaged with this young person because, they're experiencing low mood and they're dropping confidence and a lot of anxiety, and their form is dropping off and they're temperamental and so on and so forth. And you could argue a part of the intervention here is actually trying to turn down the volume of conscientiousness around their sport, but they love their sport and they're ambitious and they want to do well. And it can be a web of challenge there, as you can well imagine, and it sounds like it possibly was for you. And it was for me as a golfer growing up. So yeah, and then people like me come along and say, well, we've got, in your own mind, you want to broaden out this young person's identity. It's not just Jack the footballer. I want you to be the student, the brother, the son, the friend. Maybe we can look at you playing the guitar, for example, and things, other hobbies. But you're going, yeah, but I want to be a footballer. I want to be a player. And so then we're trying to change your schemas, change your beliefs, change your interpretations. Well, but you can still go for that, but broaden out your identity here. So yeah, it can become quite complex and difficult, and you don't always win the battle. No matter how good you get as a sports psychologist. I mean, other sports sites may say, what are you talking about, Dan? I always help. So, I always help people. But, you don't always succeed. I believe you don't always succeed.
Yeah. Then I've got one other question, and I think that I might have to wrap it up on this one. I'm kind of combining two here, and Jack also has this. This happens to me all the time. What is this? What for the listeners?
Well, it's a celebration. You're preempting this amazing question, so releasing some balloons.
Well,
you're launching the question.
The people who are watching me, they're actually watching me on this camera, so they can't even see what's just happened there. But nonetheless, it probably helps with our context. Okay, so what I've got is talking about overthinking, and Jack and I both found that when we were playing our best football is when we genuinely didn't care. And do you think that overthinking, or even thinking about overthinking, is or becomes overthinking?
Thinking about your thinking becomes overthinking.
Yeah.
Yeah. So this is where, and it's really, I would actually, by and large, if I want to be as accurate as I can possibly be with this answer, but as succinct as possible, I would say it's thinking around outcome and performance. I would say it's overthinking around outcome and performance. And I would say it's unhelpful thinking around performance, especially. So, if you think of a scale of 1 to 10 with performance, I think the overthinking happens around got to perform, got to be 9 out of 10, got to be 8 out of 10, got to stay in the team, and all these things, and it's anxiety around performance that tends to lead to low performance a lot of the time, ironically. And so I think athletes, again, I'm going to come back, broken record here. This is where you need your mental playbook. This is where you need to break it down and say, if you're going to demand anything from yourself, if you're going to expect anything from yourself, it's around mindset, which is, and things that are much more controllable around what could be considered mindset, the attentional cues, the game face, to use my terms here, the utilization of self-talk and body language and things like that all these need to make up the mental playbook. And so to speak to your point, really in many respects, what I'm trying to do with players at the very highest level is actually turn down the volume of importance of an expectation around performance, trust their training, believe in themselves, but have a sophisticated mental playbook that they're going to invest their energy in going into game day, and then be brutal with themselves around this mental playbook. I'm going to go out there, deliver mentally. And when I do that, and it's an embodied form of mindset, it's not to suggest there's not technical, tactical, physical, attentional cues that they're there, but I define that as high performance mindset, or I define that as mindset. So that's where I would say every single day, players have to be attuned there. The performance just takes care of itself. That's not to suggest that players can't want to perform well. Of course, I'd like to perform well. I want to perform well, of course. But when you get invested in, got to perform, sometimes that kind of energy into that might work, but often it's exhausting and often it doesn't work. And when you go out there, it doesn't lead to enough psychological flexibility. So it really is, there's no coincidence. You hear this time again across all sports. Oh yeah, I played really well. I didn't have any expectations on myself, but what people are talking about is expectations on performance. So where do you direct these expectations? Direct them on mindset. Have a mental playbook, expect that from yourself to have the best possible performance. And that word possible is really important here. I want my best possible performance. So then you become very, very good at leaning into your best performance but also turning a 5 into a 6 into a 7, a 4 into a 6, your best possible performance.
I recall you saying that last time. Yeah, that's a very, very good point. Dan, seriously, like, I think Jack probably, I can speak for him here. I think that if we were to have heard what you just said then, when we were a little bit younger, and then continue to speak with you more and more, maybe we'd be in England with you playing at a Premier League club, and you'd be our mindset coach. So yeah, normally
I'd probably have a knee that I could run on as well. So that would have been nice.
That's the multi-dimensional way of thinking about this, and that's why there's all kinds of things in this. But you are, I think. Let me just, jokes aside, let me take that comment seriously. Ultimately, I think people who don't discover this side of the game don't find out just how good that they can be. But also, it's appreciating and respecting. There's a lot of overblown. I saw somebody's timeline on X the other day, and they made this. And obviously, people are trying to attract attention, but sort of like physical fitness is that's no longer the big thing. It's mental fitness is as important, and it's just like, I appreciate you're trying to attract people's attention here. This is such a wrong way. It's not. It's the classic memes that are out there that misunderstands elite sport, that actually it's a systemic approach here. This is multi-dimensional, and that both you, Nick, are probably correct there from the perspective of you didn't get the opportunity to explore how good you can be. And you're right as well, Nick, to temper that by going, yeah, but dude, I needed a knee as well. It's like there's some people who can have the best mindset in the world who are going through academy football, who they're just not going to get to the very highest level because they can't get themselves around a pitch. They're not just, I spoke to, you speak to players all the time about who the best players they faced. And one said to me randomly, he said, Gareth Barry was the best player I ever played against. It wouldn't, Gareth, no disrespect to Gareth. He was an England player, a wonderful player. But I said, okay, that's interesting. He just said, he just, his first touch, his movement, he was just gone before you got close to him. So, and that's not, that mindset is involved. Perceptual cognition is involved. Anticipation decision making, but anticipation decision making is also influenced by your technique, your tactical understanding, and your physicality. So let's be clear here. I'm not the most important person in the room, but if you take me out the room, you're missing a piece. That's the best way to describe it.
Very, very, very.
100%.
It makes me think so much. But then I'm aware of the time. It's very, very awesome to speak with you again. Like, genuinely, whenever we finish an in-person podcast, we do a bit of an applause. But I'm applauding from 17,000 kilometers away because, yeah, it's always a pleasure to speak with you. And whenever you stumble across my LinkedIn feed, I'm always thinking. And by the way, I may add, Dan kills it on LinkedIn. When I see one of your posts, it's like always doing well in the first few seconds. He is verified on LinkedIn by LinkedIn now. When I saw that, I was like, let's go, Dan. That's what I want to see. About time. So yeah, very, very appreciated, Dan. It was amazing. And yeah, very thankful for your time.
Thanks, gents. Thank you.
Thanks, Dan.